I never thought I'd live to see my own children tearing each other apart. Over money, my money. It started with whispers behind closed doors, sidelong glances at dinner, and an increasing number of just checking in phone calls that reeked of false concern. But I didn't see it for what it was, not at first. After 74 years on this earth, I thought I had seen it all. War, love, heartbreak, and the slow, patient work of building a life from scratch. I raised 3 kids after my husband passed away in his early 50s. I worked 2 jobs, skipped vacations, and poured every ounce of my soul into making sure they had more than I ever did. So, imagine the betrayal, the deep, twisting knife of betrayal, when I found out my children weren't visiting because they loved me. They were circling, like vultures. My name is Margaret Lyle, and I built a modest but comfortable life. I own my home outright, have some solid investments, and, after years of careful saving, a decent sum set aside for retirement. I was never flashy, never careless. I believed in preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. Turns out the worst came wearing the faces of my own flesh and blood. It all came to a head on my birthday. I had just turned 74. My daughter, Erin, hosted a little brunch. Nothing extravagant, just the family. The cake was dry, the coffee lukewarm, but I smiled through it. It was enough to see them all together, even if I did notice the way they barely looked at each other anymore. Then Erin brought it up, lightly, like she was just curious. "So, Mom, have you thought about updating your will?" I looked up from my slice of cake, fork in hand. My son Daniel didn't flinch. In fact, he perked up. My youngest, Olivia, rolled her eyes. I laughed nervously. "I'm not planning on going anywhere just yet." Erin tilted her head, sugar-sweet. "Of course not, but, you know, it's just smart to have things in order, just in case." Daniel chimed in. "It would make things easier for everyone, less confusion." The room went cold. I couldn't put my finger on it then, but I felt it. A shift, like I wasn't their mother anymore. I was a future asset, a bank account with a pulse. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the conversation again and again. Was I being paranoid? Maybe. But in the weeks that followed, my phone lit up more than usual. Erin offered to help with my groceries. Daniel wanted to take a look at my investment portfolio, just to make sure everything's performing. Olivia, the youngest and usually the most distant, showed up with flowers and wine. It would have been touching if it weren't so obviously fake. Then came the final straw. I walked in on Erin and Daniel in my home office, whispering with the door cracked open. Erin was holding my will, my will. "I just think it's fair we split it 3 ways, she hissed. "But Olivia's gonna fight tooth and nail for more. You know she will." Daniel's voice was low. "If we push her out early, Mom will side with us. She always spoils the youngest." I didn't hear the rest. I stood there, invisible in my own hallway, heart thudding so loud I thought it might give me away. The betrayal clung to me like a wet blanket. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm in and throw them out, but I didn't. Instead, I backed away, quietly, carefully. Because in that moment, something inside me hardened. A new clarity settled in my bones. They weren't going to fight over my money, because they weren't getting a damn cent. The thing about betrayal, it doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in slowly, like poison. At first, you taste a bitterness you can't quite place. Then your whole system shuts down. I spent the next few days in silence, walking through my house like a ghost. Every framed photo, every childhood drawing tacked on the wall suddenly felt like a lie. These weren't just memories anymore. They were weapons, proof of what I gave up for people who now saw me as an obstacle. I tried to tell myself it was just a misunderstanding, that maybe I'd heard wrong, that no child would truly conspire against their own mother over something so crass as money. But then I found the folder. Tucked away inside the filing cabinet where I kept my tax returns, tucked behind a stack of bank statements. I don't even know why I was rifling through them that morning. Call it intuition. Call it God. But there it was. A crisp, unlabeled manila folder filled with documents I hadn't authorized. Real estate estimates on my house. Spreadsheets outlining my assets, right down to my furniture. Even a printout of an email Erin had, drafted but never sent, addressed to an estate attorney. The subject line? Urgent. Estate division planning. Mother not aware yet. My knees buckled. They weren't just circling. They were already planning the feast. And I was still breathing. I sat on the couch and cried. Not the soft, gentle kind of weeping. No, this was something primal. I howled. I let every ounce of shame, guilt, and heartbreak come out in that one long, ugly sob. Because here's what you never expect as a parent, that one day your children might see you not as a person, but as a payout. When James died, I was 38. I had 3 kids under 10, and not a penny to my name. We had no life insurance, no savings, just a used sedan and a mountain of medical debt. I worked nights at the diner and cleaned houses during the day. I gave up vacations, date nights, and even my dream of going back to school, all so my kids could live comfortably. And now? This? Erin had always been the responsible one. She got good grades, married well, and had 2 perfect kids. I trusted her. Daniel was quieter, more reserved. But I knew his marriage was on the rocks and his job was unstable. Maybe that explained the desperation. Olivia? Well, she always marched to her own beat. Distant, yes, but never cruel. But none of that mattered, now. Because they had all shown me something I couldn't unsee. The truth. They weren't worried about me. They weren't caring for me. They were strategizing, plotting, lining up at the gate for when I finally kicked the bucket, as Daniel so charmingly joked a year ago. It wasn't just greed. It was entitlement. They thought they deserved my money, that it was owed to them, that everything I had worked for, every sleepless night, every back-breaking shift, every penny saved, wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them, and I was just in the way. And the worst part, I had let them feel that way. I had enabled it, spoiled them maybe, let them believe that just because I loved them, I would someday hand them the keys to everything I built. I didn't raise them to be like this, but somehow they had become exactly the kind of people I used to pity. I knew then that something had to change. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry, furious even. And in that fury, something else began to stir. Resolve. I may have been old, but I wasn't dead. Not yet. And I wasn't going to let the people I loved most turn my final years into a waiting game for the spoils. If they wanted a war over my money, they'd pick the wrong opponent. Because now I had nothing left to lose. The betrayal stung, yes, but it wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. No. What made this so devastating was the way it called everything into question. My entire life had been centered around family. I didn't take trips because I was saving for their college tuition. I didn't remarry because I didn't want a man interfering in how I raised my kids. I gave them every piece of myself, and then watched in my old age as they circled like scavengers over my still warm life. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about love, about respect. And they had tossed all of that aside for a few zeros on a check they thought they were entitled to. What would happen if I got sick? Would they even help me? Or would they shove me into the cheapest nursing home they could find to protect their inheritance? Would they argue over who had to take me in? Or worse, who didn't? Would they fight over what to do with my house before I was even gone? Those thoughts consumed me. I kept picturing it. Me, frail and dependent, not even gone yet, and them sitting around a table deciding how fast they could liquidate everything I built. My home sold, my things divided up like plunder, my memory reduced to a signature on a dotted line. I started sleeping with the lights on, checking locks twice. I couldn't even bring myself to answer their calls. Not because I was being petty, but because I couldn't stomach the sound of their voices, knowing what they were capable of. And here's the thing. This doesn't just happen in movies or dramatic novels. It happens all the time. I'd seen it in neighbors, in friends from church. Children getting greedy. Families torn apart by wills and money. But I never thought my family would be one of them. I thought I'd done better. Raised them better. And that's what made it worse. This betrayal wasn't just about them turning on me. It was about realizing that maybe I had failed as a mother, that all my sacrifices didn't teach them gratitude, that maybe I had only taught them to expect, to take, to count on me, even in death, to keep giving. I spent a lot of time thinking about how things got this far. When did love turn into leverage? When did visits become transactions? When did my presence stop being enough? I remembered how, just last year, Olivia forgot my birthday, but texted the next morning to ask if I'd ever considered selling the old lake house. "It's just sitting there," she'd said, "and the market's hot right now." I remembered how Erin argued that I should add her name to the deed, just in case something happens, after she took me to the doctor once for a checkup. And Daniel, he'd asked me not for advice, not for help, but straight up for money. A loan, he called it. One that never got paid back, one I wasn't supposed to mention again. These weren't isolated incidents. They were clues, and I had ignored every single one of them. I had been blind, but not anymore. Because this wasn't just about what they had already done. It was about what they were capable of doing if I didn't act now. I had to protect myself, my legacy, everything I had worked for. Not because I was greedy, not because I wanted to punish them, but because they had shown me, plain and simple, that they couldn't be trusted to honor what I had built. And that mattered. It mattered more than anything. Because if I didn't take back control, they wouldn't just ruin each other. They'd ruin me. Once the shock wore off, something colder and sharper took its place. Clarity. I wasn't going to wait for my children to devour my estate like wolves, fighting over the last scrap of meat. I was going to make sure they never got the chance. But I couldn't be emotional about it. That's how they'd expect me to react. Teary, impulsive, weak. That was their version of me. Fragile old mom who could be manipulated with a hug and a half-hearted, "I love you." No, if I wanted to protect what I'd built and teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget, I had to be strategic, meticulous, quiet. First, I called my lawyer, Sarah, a sharp woman in her early 40s with a voice like steel and a memory like a vault. She'd handled my will years ago, when James died, and had always told me, update it when life changes. "Well, Sarah," I said on the phone, life just changed. We met the next day. I brought every financial document, property deed, insurance policy, and retirement statement I had. I laid it all out on her desk like a war map. She looked at me, eyes wide, and said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "I'm cutting them out, all of them." Her eyebrows lifted. "All 3 kids?" "Every last one." She leaned back in her chair and gave me a long, respectful nod. "Okay, let's do it right." That was the first move, updating my will, completely. I removed Erin, Daniel, and Olivia as beneficiaries. Every asset, every account, every piece of property was rerouted to a trust I created under my own name, with instructions for what should happen when I pass. And here's the twist. They weren't left with nothing out of cruelty. They were left with nothing because I had found someone else to inherit it all. I contacted my niece, Kate, my late sister's daughter. She lived across the country and had visited me twice a year for the past decade. Not because she wanted anything, but because she genuinely cared. She sent birthday cards. She called for advice. She once flew out just to take me to see the ocean, saying, "You deserve to see something beautiful before winter comes." She didn't know what I owned. She never asked, and that was exactly why she was going to get everything. Sarah drafted a new will, airtight and legally bulletproof. The trust would protect my estate from manipulation, and even better, it included a clause, my own personal cherry on top. It stated that in the event any of my children contested the will, they would each receive exactly $1. $1. A legal middle finger, if you will. But I didn't stop there. I also moved to change my power of attorney in healthcare. Proxy. Erin had been listed as both. That was a mistake. If I ever became incapacitated, she'd have full control over my finances and health decisions. No more. I replaced her with Kate, and then informed my doctor, my bank, and even the local hospital. It felt like closing doors one by one, doors I had foolishly left open for people who never had my best interests in mind. And the final part of the plan? Silence. I didn't tell them a thing. Not yet. I wanted them to believe everything was normal. I wanted them to keep playing their little game, keep up their fake concern, and continue thinking they were fooling me. Because when the truth came out, when the will was finally revealed, it would hit like a lightning strike. And maybe then, just maybe, they'd realize what they had thrown away. But that wasn't up to me anymore. I had taken my power back. They thought they could outsmart me, but I was the one holding the pen now. The next few weeks felt like a slow burn, the kind where you're waiting for the match to catch fire, but nothing happens. Until one day, it does. And when it does, it spreads faster than you could have ever imagined. I spent my time quietly, methodically, laying the groundwork for the plan. The hardest part wasn't even the legal stuff. It was watching them act like nothing had changed, watching them continue to call me, visit, ask for favors, all while knowing what I had done behind the scenes. It was a game of patience, and I wasn't about to rush it. First, I stopped answering their calls immediately. Instead, I let them leave their usual too cheerful voicemail messages. Erin left a message after missing my call, asking if I was okay. Daniel texted about a business opportunity he wanted to talk to me about, and Olivia sent a photo of her new dog, trying to engage me like everything was perfectly normal. I didn't respond. Not for days. I didn't even acknowledge it when I spoke to them at family events. If they asked about the will, I played it cool, pretending like I hadn't made any changes. The power of silence is underestimated. One afternoon, a few weeks later, I received a letter from Erin. It was polite. Too polite. She mentioned how concerned she was about me, about the future, about what would happen to everything when I'm gone. She said she was worried about my health, and just like that, it clicked. She thought she could still worm her way in, that I would soften and hand her a key to the kingdom. I read the letter twice before I put it in the drawer and went about my day. I knew what she was after. She wanted me to soften up, to give her a reason to feel entitled again. But I had already made my decision. By the time Erin sent that letter, I had already taken the necessary steps to seal my fate. I'd visited my bank, without telling anyone, and moved every penny I had into an account that only I could access. No joint accounts, no hidden places for them to siphon funds from. Then there was the little matter of my life insurance policy. I called the company and switched the beneficiary from Daniel, who'd been listed before, to Kate. When I asked the agent if they needed anything further, she asked, "Will your family be informed?" "No," I told her, my voice unwavering. "They won't be informed, not unless they need to be." I didn't even flinch as I said it. I had made my peace with the fact that I was cutting ties with the people who should have loved me the most. I didn't need their approval anymore. But it wasn't just about the money. I was playing the long game, the hardest part of executing. A plan like this wasn't gathering the evidence, changing accounts, or even consulting lawyers. It was the fact that you had to be ready for the inevitable fallout. I had to be prepared to watch my children turn on me when they discovered what I'd done. And when that moment came, I needed to be strong enough to look them in the eyes and tell them I wasn't sorry. In the meantime, I watched. I kept my distance. I let them believe they were getting away with their little games. One evening, a month later, Erin called me again. This time, her voice wasn't sweet. It was sharp, anxious. "Mom, I've been thinking about the will," she said, "and I really think we need to have a talk. This is all very unexpected. Maybe we should sit down and work this out." The old me would have crumbled at that. The old me would have worried about her feelings, about the guilt of saying no. I would have let her manipulate me into giving her another chance. But not now. "No, Erin, there's nothing to work out. I've made my decisions, and I'm not changing them," I said, my voice firm, final. She went silent for a moment, then tried a different angle. "Mom, you don't really think Kate is going to—" "I think Kate will take care of things, just as I've asked." I cut her off. It was as if the air had thickened in that moment. The tension was palpable, and for a second I imagined I could hear her jaw clench through the phone. "I see," she said before hanging up abruptly. I had expected her to protest, to argue, to try and guilt-trip me into backing down. But, this time, I didn't give her the satisfaction. The game had changed, and so had I. The moment came sooner than I thought. I hadn't expected them to confront me all at once. But there they were, Erin, Daniel, and Olivia, standing on my front porch, looking like they were prepared for battle. I opened the door, keeping my face neutral. But inside I was ready for them to reveal their cards, ready to stand my ground. Erin spoke first, her voice falsely calm. "We need to talk, Mom. About your will. About all of this." I didn't flinch. "I know exactly what this is about." Daniel stood behind her, arms crossed, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was always good at reading people, and I could see the suspicion creeping into his eyes. Olivia, the quietest of the three, stood to the side, her lips tight as if she were unsure whether to engage or remain silent. "Mom," Erin continued, stepping forward as if trying to gain my favor, "you've made a huge mistake. We're your family. We deserve to have a say in what happens with everything you've worked for. You can't just shut us out like this." "Actually, I can," I replied coolly, meeting her gaze. And I did. The air between us seemed to crackle, the tension so thick I could barely breathe. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. You have no right to make decisions like this without talking to us. Daniel snapped, his voice rising. "We're your children. We've been here for you, through everything. And this is how you repay us?" I could hear the anger in his voice, the entitlement. His hands clenched into fists, but I didn't flinch. I just stared at him, letting his words fall away. "You've been here for me?" I repeated as if the idea hadn't even occurred to me. "For what? To take what you think is yours? No, Daniel. You've been here because you thought I owed you something. I don't owe you anything." That stopped him. And then Olivia spoke, her voice soft, but with a bite. "This is just wrong, Mom. You know it. We've always been a family, and now you've turned us against each other, over money." "No," I corrected. "This isn't about money. This is about respect. This is about realizing that the life I've built isn't something for you to fight over after I'm gone. It's mine to control, and I'm doing that while I'm still alive." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence between us stretched out, but I didn't care. This was the moment, the confrontation, the reckoning I had been waiting for. "You really think Kate's going to know what to do with all of this?" Erin sneered. "She's barely even a part of this family. She's just going to sell everything off the minute you're gone, just like we would. You're setting her up to fail." "You think I haven't thought about that?" I asked, my voice level, cold. "Kate will take care of it. She'll do what none of you were ever willing to do. Honor the life I lived, not treat it as a transaction." I could see the shock on their faces. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected me to stand so firmly, to be so resolute. They had thought that, by showing up here, by confronting me, they would make me bend, that I would apologize, cave to their demands. But I didn't. "I won't apologize for this," I told them. "I'm not sorry for taking back what should have been mine all along. You think I didn't notice the greed in your eyes? The way you've been waiting for me to slip up so you could take over? You've shown me exactly who you are." Their faces were a mixture of disbelief and anger. They had no words left. I could see it in their eyes. Everything they thought they could manipulate, everything they assumed would be handed to them, had slipped through their fingers. But the truth was, they didn't want my things. They didn't want my house, my money, my belongings. What they really wanted was control, and that's what I had taken away from them. "So, what now?" Daniel finally muttered. "What do we do now?" "You leave," I said, "and you accept that the choices you've made have consequences, and you'll live with them, the same way I'll live with the consequences of the choices I made when I raised you." They stood there for a moment longer, the silence now heavy and full of unsaid things, but none of them moved. Finally, Erin turned, her face pale. "You've really done this. You've really shut us out." Her voice cracked, but there was no remorse, no regret, just anger, pure, unchecked anger. "I've done what I had to do," I said. "You'll understand in time." And then they left. I didn't watch them go. I didn't need to. I'd said what I had to say, and now they were the ones who had to live with it. As I closed the door behind them, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of finality, of peace, the anger, the hurt, the disappointment. They all began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet strength. I had taken back control. I had exposed the truth. And in the end, karma had done its job. They would have to face the consequences of their actions. And I could finally let go of the burden of trying to please them. I could move on.